Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another live stream. If you could do the usual, which is just let me know, can you see, can you hear, does everything sound and look okay? That would be absolutely fantastic. Then I'll introduce tonight's guests and I'll do a couple of welcomes, just sort of say who's in the chat tonight. But as always, I just want to quickly go through the way that we work with these live streams, which is if you've got a question, just use #Q. That just means I can very quickly and easily go ahead and find what questions you want to raise tonight. So #Q just makes life a little easier. So tonight's live stream, as you probably already know by the title of it and the thumbnail, it's all about talking about Freemius. I've got two guests in tonight. I've got Vova Feldman, who's the CEO behind Freemius, to answer the questions that you may have. I've got some questions that I want to sort of pose to him, and I've also got some videos that have been pre-recorded by David McCan, who's my second guest tonight. So those are going to kind of come in. We're going to talk about Freemius, raise some of the questions you may have, and hopefully we can kind of get through all the different questions and comments and feedback that have been kind of going around in different Facebook groups and Twitter and things like that, and we can see exactly what the situation is. So if you've got any questions regarding Freemius, any concerns, be sure to put them in the chat and use #Q to start off with. So if you could just let me know if everything looks and sounds okay, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. And then I'm going to go through and say a couple of hellos to you beautiful people who've joined me again tonight. So if you could just let me know, that would be fantastic. And then I'm going to do my usual welcomes. So like I say, it's a very simple kind of layout tonight. Questions, answers, talking about different topics, different points, just to make sure that we kind of clear the air and find out exactly what the situation is and the concerns you may have about Freemius, the licensing and various other things. So that's the topic tonight. So again, if you could just let me know in the comments if this sounds and looks okay and everything is working okay, that would be fantastic. Awesome. Thank you very much, Volker. You just made my night a little bit easier. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor up. I'm going to pass you over to both Vova and to David one at a time so they can say who they are, what they do, and just introduce themselves to you guys. So I'm going to pass you over. So good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day and evening for joining in tonight and getting involved in the comments, the questions, and everything else about Freemius. So first of all, Vova, if I hand the floor over to you, if you could just let us know who you are, what you do, and just tell us a little bit about how we can find out more information.
Sure. So first of all, thanks a lot for organizing this. I know it took some time, but I really appreciate the efforts. My name is Vova Feldman, founder and CEO at Freemius. Freemius is an all-inclusive e-commerce solution for plugin and theme developers that basically helps them to commercialize their products and provide all the necessary tools, both for the developers and the users, to make that whole thing happen. If you want to learn more about Freemius, freemius.com, we write a lot of content about those topics on our blog, so you're welcome to check. In the context of this specific webinar, I just wanted to mention that when we started Freemius 7 years ago, like any other company and startup, we have to focus. We can't, solve everything. We're limited in resources. And when we defined the user persona, we basically identified that most users are people who are running a website for themselves or one website for a company they're working for. So this is the audience that we focus at, and a lot of the user experience decisions that were made over the years were to optimize specifically the user experience for that persona. Now that we have grown, right, we understand that there is a strong community of builders, while a small percentage, but still very powerful and has a lot of impact. And today we have, different resources. We already developed a lot of the fundamentals, and I'm here to make sure to listen to that audience and see what we can do in order to facilitate the needs of builders. So just wanted to frame that. Appreciate the opportunity.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for joining us. So David, I'm going to hand the floor over to you so you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, if you wouldn't mind. So David, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for organizing this, and thank you, Vova, for joining and being so open to talk about Freemius. I blog on WebTNG, and I have a YouTube channel, and help to run a Facebook group, Dynamic WordPress. And when I do reviews for developers who are using Freemius, when I post a review or share some new update about the product, often there are a lot of comments, oh, but it uses Freemius, I don't want to touch it. And I think it's a shame that the innovations and creativity of the developers get overshadowed by hesitancy and perhaps distrust in Freemius. And so, that's kind of my main motivation here is, in the ideal world, I think it would be awesome if Freemius could become trusted. When people saw, oh, it's a Freemius, they're using Freemius, they would go, that's great. I know that, the user is taken care of.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David, for taking the time to sort of give us a little bit of information about yourself and also about the reasoning behind this sort of being involved in this Q&A with Vova. Now, before we go any further, let me just quickly say I do apologize that there is a bit of an echo. We tried to get to the bottom of it, but unfortunately, we're kind of going to have to live with it for the duration of this live stream. So I do apologize for that. Hopefully, it won't distract you too much from what we're doing. Okay, so as David has kind of sort of talked about Vova, there's this problem, I think, with the perception of what is happening with Freemius when plugins and things are using it. I mean, I'm sure that this is something that you've come across many, many times. So, I mean, I think the first question we have to ask is, what are you doing to kind of help allay those fears, frustrations, and the sort of the problems with, data that's passing back and forth and the various different parts of the Freemius experience? I mean, I know from my own point of view that it does get a little bit frustrating and in some cases a little bit intrusive. So what are you doing to kind of help alleviate those concerns?
Sure. So when we started Freemius, it's important to get the full background. One of the things we identified is that a lot of the ongoing development that happens in the ecosystem is mostly not based on data. It's mostly based on customer support, WordPress.org forums, etc., which is not necessarily representing most of the users. If we look outside of the WordPress bubble, you can't really develop products without the concept of the feedback loop. So for us, it was kind of, I would say, a natural to offer as part of our solution the ability for people to opt in to free products, as well as collecting some data when activating a license, with the sole purpose to provide some data to developers to have a basic understanding and acquaintance with their users in order for them to be able to improve their products, build features that are more relevant, instead of relying on guesses and gut feelings, etc. We do understand that the practices that we brought into WordPress were things that are kind of new, and when you're pushing the edge, you sometimes get pushbacks. So what we're doing today is we are basically taking the things that are collected through the SDK and turning them incrementally to become more and more optional. So there are still things in the platform in terms of how we designed it that it will take more time in order for us to actually facilitate that. But if you actually look in on what we're going to release very soon, to the updates of the license activation, you will see that you can actually activate a license with a very minimal footprint, really with the fundamentals pretty much similar to what the other solutions are offering the market, like WooCommerce and EDD. So we are constantly listening to feedback, constructive feedback, something that is actionable and we can do with that. We can actually do something in a product and take it back and implement it. In the end of the day, we do want to make users happy. This is what we do. We want developers to love Freemius, and we want users to also love Freemius and trust products that are using Freemius. If we're not going, to make sure users are happy, developers won't be happy too. So this is a symbiotic relationship, but it takes time. That's people need to be patient. We have a lot of things going on all the time, but I can assure you guys that we're working on tons of things that related to all those feedbacks that we're collecting, and we can talk about specifics later on if you want.
Awesome. I think one of the sort of the biggest concerns that a lot of people have is that the data that's being passed back and forth is not necessarily something that they want and they have a lot of control over. I know that David's got the little video that we'll play in a moment, which I think is the right video snippet, which is about what information is being passed over, how accounts are being created, and not necessarily the clarity that goes with that sort of side of things. And I think that's, from my point of view, that appears to be where the biggest problem is that lack of transparency and lack of, sometimes you don't feel like you're actually getting the option to opt in to the data that you want to supply. It's a case of, it's an all or nothing process. It's like, if you give us, if you check this box, for example, and again, like I say, this is something we'll see in David's video, I think. If you check this box, it's a case of, well, you are opting into everything, as opposed to the option that just says, I want to opt into updates, but I don't want to opt into these other three things. And I think this is definitely where something needs to be sort of addressed to kind of allow us to have more control over what data is actually going to be submitted. I understand that from a developer's point of view, all this data is incredibly useful for them to be able to see exactly what's going on with their product and the sales and things like that, both with the paid for version and probably more so with the free version. That's kind of where I think a lot of people's frustration comes in, is because we want transparency. We want a case of, if I want to try out a free plugin, I don't want to have to give you any of my information. I literally just want to try it out. Data is, when you take a look at Apple, for example, how they are now approaching the whole data information and how you submit and how you can limit the submission of data. I think that's something that now needs to be addressed and embraced across any kind of platform. Like I say, if Freemius is becoming one of the biggest platforms to deal with this side of things, I think you do have to kind of really look at that and make that one of your priorities from our point of view as a user, as opposed to what feels like a lopsided sort of slant towards the developer having as much information as they can at the expense of what the user wants to give over. And that's kind of where I've kind of seeing it with the different comments and things that I've seen. But I mean, David, what are your thoughts on this? And once you've kind of finished this bit, I shall pop the video on. I think it's probably relevant then, and we can kind of talk through that. But David, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I agree with what you say. I think that especially for the free plugin, let's focus, for free plugins and themes, let's focus on that. People are used to, with WordPress.org downloads, of not having any tracking. And so, I appreciate and I like that you have the information and the opt-in screen, but I don't feel it's clear enough. And, I'm not sure people realize what they're agreeing to, that they are agreeing to something in some cases and what it is they're agreeing to. So I think it'd be really nice to make those things clear, and it might result in fewer people opting in, but I think it would result in less feedback to the developers, questions about Freemius.
Yeah, good points. I mean, Vova, do you have anything to sort of kind of come back on that with what we are talking about before, like say, I play that little video?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, you don't have to opt in, right? If you have any data concerns and you are installing a free product that integrated with the SDK, you can skip the opt-in altogether, and we don't collect any information. When it comes to paid products, the amount of data that we are collecting is really little. And like I said, we are making it even less when it comes to the required data. And it's really all the information that is collected, you're saying that it's in a favor of the developer, but what I'm trying to explain here, that if we look on a bigger picture, everything when it comes to data that benefits the developers, benefiting indirectly the users, right? The more I know about my users, the better I can accommodate their needs. And again, we don't track any, like how do you use the plugin or something like that. We're talking about technical things like the WordPress version, the plugin version, what is the status of the product and things like that. Yes, there are also the plugins and themes, but this is currently off by default. So people actually need to opt in to share that data on license activation. So the footprint is very little when it comes to free products. People don't have, like, if you're concerned about privacy, you can just skip the opt-in altogether. I also think that in comparison to other solutions, like we're not the only one that collect data. Also WooCommerce does that, Jetpack and many others. I feel that we're the most transparent. We're actually putting exactly all the permissions that are being collected straight in the opt-in screen. While if you look on other solutions, they just write a sentence and you don't know what you're really opting into. So I actually feel that the fact that we were so transparent and put those things right, it actually, hurt us. I don't think that it's bad, and I don't want to hide it. On the contrary, I'm agreeing with you that we have to be transparent because it's especially important for us. We want to make sure that everything is compliant with the WordPress.org guidelines. But I think that, things are pretty clear. You can see exactly the data that is being collected and how. You have the option to skip it on a free product. So if you're concerned about anything, you don't have to opt in. Okay, it's all good. Yeah.
Okay, just to quickly ask a question then. Is there any reason why we've only got one opt-in? Let's just say, I know you're saying it is like you don't have to opt in, and you are right, you don't have to opt in. But I think the lack of clarity is where the problem comes in. It's like you don't have to sort of opt into it, but you then have messages all over the place saying you literally, and I'm talking about like things like Blocksy, for example. This is an example that I've looked at recently. And it's like, it's basically worded in such a way during the process of activating the free version, and then when you go into the sort of the dashboard, that you're kind of made to feel that if you don't opt in, you could have security problems in the future. And I think, as David highlighted in the video recently, the wording is something that needs to be clarified. And I think, to kind of go back to my point earlier on, yes, you do give the option to opt out, but I think what would be better is the option to choose what you opt out of and what you opt into, as opposed to a one size fits all. You literally just have, there's a button, you're opting into all these things. Whereas I might want to opt in to be notified of updates, so I'm happy for you to have my email address, for example, but maybe I don't want you to have things like the plugin status, the IP address, the WordPress version, those kinds of things. You may think it's silly, and you said that other platforms do this, but I think forget other platforms. I think what we need to be clear on is that other platforms are irrelevant when you can be better than them. And I think there's this awful sort of like problematic thing where the status quo becomes like, well, other people do it, so we can do it. And I think what would be better is to forget what those other ones are doing and just say, let's actually be better than them. Do you know what I mean? So I think, from my point of view, I would much rather see exactly what I'm opting into and then choose what I don't want you to know and what I'm happy for you to know. And I can't see that would be a particularly difficult thing to implement from your point of view, because at the end of the day, it's a couple more checkboxes that by default technically should be off, and then you opt in. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want to sort of like gang up on you kind of thing, but that's the kind of way that I would prefer it to be done. And I'm probably sure that other people are the same as well. David, I'm going to hand it over to you because I can see you nodding and smiling. So I'm going to hand it over to you so you can kind of give me your input on this topic.
that 100% I agree with what you're saying, and I think, I'd like to see Freemius be the shining example of what is shown, held up in the WordPress community. So
I'm all up for it.
and like, for example, I think a lot of people, when they opt in, they see that screen, they're thinking, okay, I'm going to share the PHP version, which would be useful for developers, and the WordPress version and things like that. But they don't like, I might be willing to do that, but I don't really want to share my name and email address. And so I think that goes right along with what Paul is saying.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm going to bring up a sort of comment here from Els, who's part of the Facebook group. She's also incredibly experienced in GDPR. And I think, Vova, if you don't mind me asking, where are you from, and where is Freemius actually legally based?
So we are a US company with a daughter company in Israel.
Okay.
And I'm currently in Israel, and there are different team members all over the world.
Okay. The reason I ask is because I think it's important to kind of know where companies are based, because that does impact, I think, on the outlook of, do you comply to GDPR if you're a US-based company? Do you know what I mean? There's different takes on how this is approached. But I want to bring this sort of question up because it's kind of in line with what I was just saying and what David was just saying. And I think it's worth bringing up as well. It's like, Els is involved in GDPR as part of her career, so she does know about GDPR. And basically, this is kind of echoing what I was just saying, where you're not giving us that segmented option to choose what we do and don't want to opt into. That becomes non-compliant with GDPR. So that's an important thing. So, I mean, how do you kind of respond to that statement? I mean, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that. And to be honest, about GDPR in general, because like I say, I'm pretty sure that Israel is not governed by GDPR, and I know the US have their own variant on it, but it's still not GDPR. So how do you kind of approach that side of things with regards to, being compliant with that?
Well, I think all the world is governed by GDPR if you are dealing with the European Union, and actually Israeli privacy laws are pretty similar. I would say that I'm not sure what, the exact claim that coming from the community member that you mentioned, but you can skip the opt-in. It's fine. No one is tracking any data without your consent. That's what basically GDPR says. The fact that you can't decide don't have the granularity to choose, I want to share this, but I don't want to share that. It's not necessarily related to GDPR.
I'm not up on GDPR that well, so I'm going to leave that to others to come back and tell me about it a little bit more. But okay, let's leave that at this point. Let's play that little video snippet that we've got from David, which is kind of, I know this is what we want to talk about, and then let's have a little chat about that side of things. So I'm going to play that. It's only a couple of minutes long, and then we can kind of come back and carry on the discussion.
Just going to update that. Okay, now before I install the Freemius product, I'm going to install another plugin, and this plugin monitors so you can see what API calls are being made from your WordPress site. So this way we'll be able to see some of the communication with Freemius. We won't see the data inside the data packets, but we'll see the calls to Freemius. So we have that installed, and you can see here there was a WordPress core cron job. All right, so now let's go and install a plugin that uses Freemius, and Doubly is such a plugin. Developer is very friendly. By using his plugin, I'm not saying anything about him. The idea is to look at Freemius. I'm going to go ahead and install this, and I'll activate it. Now we get a screen here where we don't want to miss an update, so opt into security and feature update notifications and non-sensitive diagnostic tracking. So this is what they're asking us to do, and there are options to allow and continue or skip. And then there's this here, what permissions are being granted. It's not really clear that that's necessarily a link, but let's Click on it, and it tells you what information is being shared. Your profile, your name and email address, the site URL, WordPress version, and PHP info, your admin notices, updates, announcements, and marketing, no spam, current plugin status, and plugins and themes. So the title, slug, version, and is active of plugins and themes. You have the option to turn that off. Okay, now I'm going to go through this twice. First time skipping the opt-in and the second time opting in so we can see the difference. But before I click the skip button, let's go and look at what we have here. Is I've not yet clicked to skip or opt in, and I can see that there's been an API call to Freemius. It says ping. So the Freemius website has been pinged. This number right here, 9579, that is the plugin ID for the Doubly plugin. Okay, let's go and look at the Doubly plugin. Here's the main plugin file. And here it says Doubly Freemius ID is 9579. So this is the product ID of Doubly. So what's happened here is that an API call is made to Freemius. It includes in the URL the product ID, which means that the receiving server knows the product that's being installed, and it has the IP address of the server from the web packet that, is sent to the server. Then it has version of Doubly, and it has version number of the SDK for Freemius. It says admin true, is Ajax false, is cron false, is GDPR test 0. So I guess it's saying it's not GDPR. And is HTTP true, and the SDK version again. Let's go back here. So we haven't skipped or opted in yet. So now I'm going to skip. Let's go back now here. I'm going to refresh this. And here's been a second call sent after we skipped. It also has the product ID, and they get the IP address of the website from the IP packet. And here it says skip. Okay, so there's some tracking of the fact that the plugin was installed and that the user skipped sharing the data. Now we got a menu.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that that was the end of that little snippet. That kind of leads to an important question there, which I'm sure David is probably going to say that's exactly what he's going to say, is if you're skipping, the IP address shouldn't be allowed to be passed to the servers because that's basically identifying information, and therefore that is against GDPR. So, I mean, David, what are your thoughts on that? And then, like I say, I'll hand things over to Vova to kind of come back and give us his answer on that side of things. So, David.
Well, we did talk about this a little bit previously, and Vova, you mentioned that Jetpack also pings a server. So I was curious, and I tried that, and it's a very simple kind of hit to Jetpack, domain. And the idea that you mentioned is you want to make sure that you can connect to the server before doing this opt-in so that, there isn't an error or something. And I just contrasted what the Jetpack is doing, which is the same type of thing. It's going to the Jetpack server. However, it doesn't include any extra information. You've got a lot of information. You've got the product ID, the product version, and also Jetpack, some of the modules actually require you to be connected to the WordPress.com platform. So it's a requirement of the plugin, whereas it's not of the free like Bloxy or Doubly or some of the others.
So I'm going to hand that over to you, Vova, with regards to those comments and questions, and what we've just seen on the screen. So if you could give me your point of view, that'd be great.
Sure. So the purpose of that ping is simply to check if there's connectivity to the API, and if there's no connectivity, there's no point to bother the user, and we are just skipping the whole opt-in screen altogether. The reason there are extra metadata sent there is for debugging issues. If there's connectivity issue and we want to investigate that, it gives us additional insights that we can actually activate logs on Nginx, and then when it happens, we can get more insights about it. There's no information that's being stored or something like that. The same about the skip. Nothing is really being stored. It's just a signal that we send to the server. Regardless, I totally understand why you guys raised that concern. And honestly, I'm not sure if it's worth the keeping it. And there's a good chance we'll remove that because I'm not sure if, for the very little number of those users that are facing connectivity issues, it's worth to initiate that ping from the first place. So definitely, a feedback that's worth implementing and actioning on. I would just say that, Paul, this is not against GDPR. The fact that every HTTP request that's made to any server sends the IP. That's how the internet works. So, it's saying the same as if, someone browsing through your website, you are immediately breaking GDPR. So as long as you're not storing that personal identifiable information, that's fine. Regardless, like I said, it is something that's worth to reconsider, and it's already written on my list after watching that video.
I think when it comes to the IP side of things, would there be any difficulty in obfuscating that? So you still get the information you need back from the ping of the server, but there's no, because at the end of the day, an IP address is an identifying piece of information, and anything that can identify and information that it is passed back and forth. My understanding, and please, Els, like I say, this is what you do. Let me know if I'm talking out of my butt here, because it's perfectly likely. I say, when it comes to GDPR, I've got limited knowledge, enough to probably be dangerous. But yeah, like I say, I think anything you can do, I think as David has said, you would be better, I think, if you want to become the shining example of how you set yourself apart from the likes of Jetpack, from the likes of EDD, so you kind of like, okay, they do it and people don't like it. So if we can do something to make ourselves separate from them and allay those concerns, because I think that's the biggest problem that people have, or one of the biggest problems, is we are getting more and more told that our data is being spread around in so many different places that we don't have access to, that we don't want that. And I think anything anyone can do to kind of stop those kinds of things and allay those fears and those frustrations is a good thing, like I say. So I think if you can separate yourself in whatever method you can from the likes of Jetpack, from the likes of the digital download EDD, I think that's only going to serve you as a company better, because you're going to get more people that will feel comfortable, and they'll probably choose your platform over another one. Because at the end of the day, as we've already seen, as David said right at the beginning of this sort of the stream, when he posts up a video or content about a particular plugin, if it uses Freemius, then it gets a lot of backlash from that. And ultimately, what you as a company want is to have the opposite effect, is that, if you're using EDD or you're using something else, another platform, they are taking data and we don't. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Do you kind of see where I'm coming from with that side of things?
I like I said, I totally agree with that, and that's a good point, that you mentioned about, the sometimes the negative sentiment. I'm sure that the people that, vocal about it, they had negative experiences with Freemius. I'm pretty sure. But the thing is, people usually tend to remember negative experiences for a long period. I recently had a chat with a friend of mine, and we talked about, a favorite burger restaurant. And I told him, my restaurant here in Israel, and he like, I hate them. It's like, yikes. And I asked him, when was the last time that you actually went and eat the burger there? And he said like 20 years ago. So obviously they switch like 4 owners on the fly, and the burgers are really, it's not the same. but the experience, was stuck in his head. And I totally get that. But what I want to say is that we keep improving the product all the time. And what Freemius was 5 years ago, it's not the same that 3 years ago, and it's not the same what's going to be tomorrow. So we keep evolving, getting feedback, iterating, and improving the product. So I do want to ask people that, previously had negative experiences, like with the migration, with Ocean WP, that I know was disaster. I admit it was disaster for whatever reasons. Not going to dive into that, but I do want to say, give us another chance, because I promise you many things have changed. I'm going to change too.
That's good to hear. That's exactly what all of us want, for changes for the better, for all of our protection. Just to quickly ask a question, what IP address is actually sent back? Is it the user's IP address, or is it the server that the website is hosted on's IP address?
What do you mean again?
You know when you skip and there's a ping to the Freemius servers talking about the free sort of plugin. Is the IP address that's actually sent there, is that the server that the website is hosted on its IP address, or is it the IP address of the user that's installing the plugin?
So first of all, every HTTP, every request in the internet goes with the IP address of the server that initiates, with a computer that initiates that request. So we don't explicitly send the IP, just coming with a ping, because that's how the internet works. Regardless, we don't save that data. The point of the skip was that we previously wanted to provide some rough estimation about the number of people that clicking skip by anonymously managing a counter of skips for those plugins. We no longer do that. The skip is still there for legacy reasons. We'll remove it because we realize that it's far from being accurate and it's not informative enough.
Yeah, I think the skip option, as I would see it, would be if you skip it, then no data should be passed at all. You're kind of skipping and opting out. But we will leave that point there. David, do you have anything else you want to add to this segment before we go over to the questions that I've got from different people that are in the chat, and also the questions we've got from our anonymous form from before?
Yeah, just one request, and that is, I like what you're saying, Vova, that, as Paul said, that's the kind of thing that, we want to hear. But my request is, could you make those the default and the recommendation, the highest privacy and consideration for the users as the default and the recommendation? Because I think what happens sometimes is you add maybe the option for the developer to have the toggle off, say, by default or something, but that's something they have to go in and do, and the way that if they just go in and set it up, it's not that way that's most protected. And so, from Freemius's point of view, well, you've given the developer the option, but you've also made it kind of the default that it works the other way. So that's my request, that, really focus on the privacy and making it the default.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, is that, by default, you've opted out as opposed to opted in to any kind of data sharing. And again, I think just little things like that. And I know that the link and the information that that David brought up in his video, I think they're the kinds of things, the what information is being shared kind of thing. I think that needs to be clear, front and center, obvious that they can click on it. And I think if you put the sort of granular control over what information, like if you look at what was in that video, it's like there's a list of 10 different things, for example. It's not like 6 or 7, but you know what I mean. It would be nice if they were options. They're a pain in the behind, and it would be nice to have a toggle all and toggle none kind of thing on there. Because we all get sick to death of the cookie consent that is just put in there in such a way that it makes it a bloody nightmare to turn everything off. But I do think that those granular controls and an easy opt-in, opt-out for everything would just set a lot of people's minds at ease. And they're just the little things I think are making clear about the link to show exactly what information is being sort of shared. And maybe even instead of that being a link you have to click to open up, which is kind of quite difficult to see for some people when they're going through it quickly, maybe they are open as default so everyone can see exactly what information is being shared. Visually, it probably doesn't look as nice, but from a user's point of view and from, seeing exactly what information is going to be shared or not shared, depending on the opt-in or opt-out, they just make everything feel more transparent. And I think that's something that would, again, set you in good stead with people, because nothing feels like it's being hidden away. It's front and center. You can't miss it. It's up to you then to choose to opt in. Does that make sense? Can you see where I'm coming from with that? And silly little thing maybe,
Yep.
but I think it does make a difference.
So I would just want to say that I wish we could so easily add switches, but visually it's very easy. We can just add the switches, but behind the scenes, I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you are not interested to share the user information, right? The email and the name. But then the way we design the system is that every website needs to be linked to a user by definition. So we can really create kind of a website entity that will store like the website URL, PHP version, etc., without associating it with the user. So there are some things in the design of the solution that it's easy just to add the switches, but actually to make the functionality behind the scenes, that's a little more tricky. So the point is, is if you are concerned about privacy, and I'm talking right now about the free plugins that using Freemius. Like, I totally agree that we can do better when it comes to, maybe surfacing the fact that this is expandable, that section, by adding some extra icon or some visual. But the way we see that there's a group of people that, really concerned about privacy, others that care less about it. If you are concerned about privacy, most likely you are going to look for those permissions and going to, click on that link. Hopefully that, again, we can make it even more transparent. If you're not concerned about privacy, do we really want to, to show all that information when the user actually just want to start using the product? They can still skip it, right? So it's kind of a balance and a product question, like, should we address it to the people that have specifically privacy concerns, which is the smaller percentage, or should we build and address a product for the majority of the people? So it is challenging to find that balance to basically accommodate both audiences.
I'm going to push back on that one. I do apologize, but I'm going to push back on that. I think what might be a smaller percentage now is going to grow, because we are becoming more and more and more exposed to data leaks and issues with security and privacy. And I think all of those things are only going to get more, especially if when you take a look at what companies like Apple are doing, GDPR, whatever the American version of it is, and that's only going to get wider spread. Take a look at the fines that Google have had for passing IP information. I'm not saying you're doing these things, but once precedents are set, when you kind of put yourself on the side of, well, we're going to err on the side of the people don't care about data collection, when that tide changes, that's going to be a much more difficult situation to clear up. So again, I think personally, and again, this is my opinion, I'm not saying it's everybody's opinion, and like I say, from a technical point of view, I don't know how everything is developed, how your SDK is put together, but I think the reality of it is, I think you might be on the wrong team right now by going down that route, and maybe it would be better to plan for it earlier rather than scrambling to sort it out later when it becomes more widespread and more people are concerned about their data and data protection and those kinds of things. And again, I'm going to hand it over to David to see, do you have any kind of thoughts on what we just covered? And then I'm going to go over to the questions that I've got. Like I say, I'm conscious of the fact we've got about 15 minutes left and I don't want to keep you guys all evening. So David, is there anything you'd like to add to what we've just said?
Just a suggestion is, if you can probably anonymize the username and email address, just create a random one to use as a placeholder, since your database structure is set up that way. And that way, you accomplish both. You don't have to change your whole structure, and the user's private information, personal information isn't saved.
Yeah, good points. I mean, I'll pass over to you so you can kind of like close up on this. I don't want to kind of feel like that we're just telling you things that you don't get a chance to answer. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How do you kind of feel about that sort of, being on the right side of minimal data collection as opposed to retrospectively having to potentially go back and sort things out when invariably things will change?
So I think, again, there are some things that we can do better, and I'm all up for it. But there are, some other restrictions that we may decide not to, to apply those. So we would need to rethink what's the meaning of, having granular kind of permissions when it comes to free products. The way I look at it, again, is if you are concerned about privacy, just skip it. Okay, you don't have to opt in, and no information is being shared. It's hard for me to imagine why would someone would want to maybe, for example, share their website information selectively, and not to share share their website URL, but not to share their WordPress version or something like that. So the way we see that if you're already willing to share information, then, share the fundamental information, excluding the plugins and themes. This is really up to you. We understand that this is kind of an extra thing. Regardless, I'm going to, bring it back to the team, take the feedback that you guys shared with me, and see if there is a way to accommodate that.
Okay, cool. Right, quick question now. Like I say, I'm going to keep it to about 10 minutes and then we'll wrap things up. But some of the questions I sort of put out an anonymous questionnaire the other day that just people could just say what issues they may have with Freemius or experiences they've had and things like that. And I've got a couple of comments here, all kind of echo the same sentiment, and it's more from a technical point of view that they've had issues where if the Freemius server is down, because obviously as we've seen where David has sort of done the videos, we've seen how it pings generally on a daily basis the Freemius server, which I'm assuming is to do the license check to make sure that the license is still active and those kinds of things. But people have had experiences where the Freemius server is down and either their paid plugin has failed the license check for the obvious reason, and therefore their plugin doesn't work. They've had problems or issues with it. Is there no way that you can kind of give a potential, should we call it a window of opportunity? So for example, if they ping the Freemius server and there is a technical issue for whatever reason that it doesn't get a sort of ping back to say it's active and so on, there's a 48-hour period, 24-hour period, whatever it is, that at least allows or avoids that problem where a plugin then comes back and says, oh, no license, and stops it from working, which obviously is not ideal when someone has paid for something and the technical issue isn't on their side, and therefore they kind of lose access to the tool that they've paid for. So, I mean, is that something you're aware of? Is there a way of working around that to give a kind of grace period to make sure that if there's an issue with the servers being down, the license servers being down, they don't get that problem moving forward?
Maybe the last time they eaten the burger was 20 years ago. I don't know, but generally we do have a grace period, and in addition, if there are any API failures, we have a mechanism in between that falls back to the latest successful API response. The issue that potentially can happen is if the license specifically, expired and the renewal hit, but there was some connectivity issue. But regardless, update checks are happening every 12 hours. And we are giving a grace period exactly of 48 hours, actually, what you mentioned, to mitigate that situation. I'm not sure what, the specific case and when it happened. There are always glitches. WordPress is complex and there are millions of environments. So maybe there was some glitch, maybe something related to caching. I don't know. It's something that we will need to investigate. But generally, we do have a 48 hours grace period.
Maybe, like I say, their experience has been a little bit older and this hasn't been something that they've experienced recently. The other thing that there's a bottleneck in the terms of loading speed on some websites, and due to the Freemius license check, and I'm assuming, and also the fact that it actually pings up a lot of the time as being malware when virus checks are being done. Now, I know it may well be a false positive, but again, it's one of those things that multiple people have kind of brought this up over various different periods of time, and obviously that's something that would concern people if it shows up as being malware, or you, especially, I mean, talking from experience myself, where my hosting company that I use for my business side of things, they're very on the ball with malware, and if there's a problem, something's flagged as malware, they give me a period of time to sort things out. You could spend an awful lot of time if it's being flagged as malware by your server, by your hosting company, when something isn't a problem. You could potentially, with the certain hosting companies, have your account closed down, have the website closed down, suspended, whatever. So, I mean, what is being done to address that? Because obviously there are various different tools that are out there that are pinging this up as being malware. So what are you kind of doing to stop that from being a situation, or at least keeping up to date with it and rectifying it if and when it actually raises its ugly head?
Sure. So every time, we hear about situation like that, usually a product developer will contact us and say, he received an email from a customer that something happened. We will try to reach out the hosting company, see what's the problem. If there, something valid behind the scenes, we'll obviously investigate. If there is no problem, they'll just whitelist it, and everything is fine. So I guess it's natural by, the size of the footprint. We have thousands of products of running Freemius on many millions of websites. So it's kind of natural that there will be false positives in that size. And we every time we stumble across something, we contact the hosting company.
Well, that's good to hear. David, have you got any sort of comments or on the sort of same lines as that?
I use main WP to update my websites, and so I don't think I would see the notice that 48-hour notice, because I'm
there's no notice. There's no notice. The license is just going to expire. If you purchase an annual license on January 1st, it will expire 48 hours on January 3rd.
Okay. So next question then is with regards to the Freemius SDK, and where people are saying like you've got an author that abandons that SDK, or abandons the product of the SDK and the kind of things that go on with it. How do you handle then security fixes where, there's been issues in the past that we talked about before, which is where you had some data leak and so on, where if someone doesn't update their SDK, it's an abandoned plugin or whatever, is there no way that can actually be handled, that SDK is either, that plugin is either removed in some way or blocked or something, to alleviate that kind of problem with outdated SDKs that have been kind of abandoned by developers and designers? Because I know, that's something that obviously a lot of people are going to be concerned with if there's a technical issue or a security issue because of that out-of-date, SDK that's involved.
Sure. So I'll just start with, we are not aware about any data leak. We did have vulnerabilities that were discovered that we patched and solved, but we're not aware about any data leaks. Regarding your question, to leave a backdoor for us to force and update the SDK from our end without the developers being aware about that would be a major security vulnerability to everything. Because let's take the worst case scenario, someone actually hijacks something on our end and then pushes an update to all the plugins and themes that using the SDK, which can potentially infect a lot of websites. So that's definitely not something that we are considering to do. We believe that this is a bad practice. When we do, like so far we had 2 vulnerabilities over the time of 7 years, which is not bad. I'm not proud of it. I wish we had 0 of them, but it happens. But in order to reduce those exposures, There are channels. The WordPress.org team is now helping in situations like that, and they can, close basically email the relevant developers if they don't update on time, and threaten to close the products until they actually update the SDK. Obviously, we email them 2 messages to make sure that they update before the vulnerability becomes public. But in the end of the day, we don't think that forcing an update is the right way to go. And this is something that the developers need to deal with, just like with any other software that uses third-party libraries. Yeah.
Fair enough. Let me just clarify that you had a vulnerability, or vulnerability is not data leak. My bad for the terminology there. Like I say, it was a totally different thing. Okay, so I'm going to just say we've pretty much come to the end of tonight's live stream. I'm going to quickly check to see if you've got any questions I think are relevant. David, is there anything you'd like to add in before I take a look if there's any questions that I think are worthwhile taking a sort of popping into the session right now before we close things down?
All right. While you're checking the stream, Vova, I just want to say you're a champ. We put you on the hot seat here, and I appreciate that you're answering the questions and whatnot. And I think, I hope that you've caught the general drift. And I think obviously you're doing some things right because you have a lot of developers who like using the Freemius platform. Interestingly enough, when I talk to them, they all say they like it because it streamlines their work process and helps them to get going quickly. None of them have ever mentioned the analytics. So I don't know if that's because it's politically incorrect to mention analytics or not, but I think that you're obviously doing something right, and maybe focusing on user privacy or privacy sensitivity, would be good all around for everybody.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. Like I say, I think become the shining example as opposed to following what others do or have done before. I think that is probably the takeaway to what we're kind of trying to get across tonight. Maybe a little bit clumsily sometimes from my own point of view, but I'm sure you kind of understand. Okay, I've got a couple of questions, or I've got at least one question from Robert Watner, who's a regular on the live streams, and he's a plugin developer. So he's saying, I have a plugin with 100,000 active installs, around 500 to 700 daily downloads. I'm actually about to release a pro version using Freemius. What kind of conversion rates could be estimated? And I think the optimal word here is could be estimated. So, Vova, I'm going to hand that over to you because I think you've probably got a better chance of answering that than either of us do.
Sure. So I would say that the average freemium conversion of plugins is anywhere between 0.5% to 2.5%. Depending on how much value the free version provides, right? It can go higher. There are plugins that the free version is kind of used mostly to lure people to upgrade to paid, so naturally those will have higher conversion, but they will also have much less free users or users in general. As a rule of thumb, I will take 2%.
Awesome. That's a pretty good conversion rate. I think if you've got 100,000 installs, that's a good potential there. Okay, I've got one more question, and then I think we'll wrap up for this evening. And this is kind of going back to the data and the whole process we kind of talked about more at the beginning of this. And this is a case of how can the consent that you've given, if you've opted in, how can you withdraw it? Where's the information that's actually been stored, and how do you remove your consent when you've opted in? I think that's what else is kind of getting at. So what's the process for that, and is it possible, and if it is, how would we go about doing it?
Yeah, so there's an opt-out link if you opt in. There's an opt-out link in the plugins section, like under the plugin links, and if it's a theme, there is an opt-out button. Sorry, when you open the theme options in the appearance section. And yeah, it's right
awesome.
there.
As long as we know it's there, that's the good thing. So I'm going to say thank you very much to both of my guests, to Vova, for actually fielding these questions tonight. I'm sure it probably wasn't as the best way you could have been spending an evening, especially after that talk of burgers. You're just making me bloody hungry now. And I'd want to say thank you very much again for David, for taking the time to create the videos, to go through a lot of the different things we talked about tonight, and to be involved in tonight's live stream. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you. If people want to find out a little bit more about either of you, anybody that kind of missed at the beginning, I'm going to quickly hand it back over to you so you can just tell us a little bit more about you and how we can find out. So David, I'm going to do you first, and then I'll pass over to Vova, and we'll close things down.
The Dynamic WordPress group on Facebook is, I hang out there a lot, and then I have the YouTube channel with WebTNG, David McCan, and the WebTNG website.
Awesome. And if you want to learn more about a lot of things to do with WordPress, page builders, lots of plugins, technical things, check out David's Facebook group, Dynamic WordPress, which is absolutely fantastic. I really do enjoy that group, and also his website. Vova, I'm going to hand it over to you. So if you'd just like to let anyone know that's interested in finding out more about Freemius, getting in contact with you, or just generally find out more if they've got questions, how can they go about doing that?
Sure. I would just say that we truly care both about developers and users. I know that there were some questions about it. We do care. For us, it's symbiotic relationship, and it's important that the entire WordPress products ecosystem will thrive. And we're going, to make the required changes. You can find me on Twitter. It's Vova Feldman, exactly as my name. You can contact us through support@freemius.com or contact@freemius.com. We're there reviewing everything. Also, feel free to engage on social. I'm communicative and available. Yeah.
Awesome. So one more time, I just say thank you very much to both of you for taking the time out tonight to join me. And I'm also going to say thank you very much for everybody that's been asking questions, get involved in the stream, giving your feedback, and anybody that actually supplied questions in the first place. I hope this has been useful. I hope you've enjoyed it and it's answered some of your questions. But like I say, if you've got anything more you want to ask, get in touch with Vova, and I'm sure he can answer those questions for you. So thank you very much one more time for joining us tonight. Hope you found it useful, informative, and I will see you very, very soon. Take care.